Well, I graduated from the University of Washington in 1939 and went to work with my dad in the Ford dealership in Auburn. And a number of my friends in college, fraternity brothers, were in the Naval ROTC, and when they graduated, they became ensigns in the Navy Reserve. In late 40 and 41, early 41, a lot of them were called to active duty, and they were already at sea in the Black Shoe Navy. And so the way things were going in Europe at the time, I felt that, well, we're going to get into this conflict whether we like it or not. And if I get into it, I'd rather be upstairs in an airplane than down in a foxhole. So I'm going to go out to the Sandpoint elimination base and give it a try. And I know my mother was just badly fearful of airplanes, and I told my dad not to tell her I was going to do this because she'd worry, and I thought if I make it, why, she can have to accept it. Anyway, I went out and checked into Sandpoint in October 41, and another young man from the University of Washington was there when I was, but I hadn't met him before, and he was in a fraternity across the street, as a matter of fact. Anyway, we checked in together and I think flipped a coin to see who got the top bunk and the lower bunk, and we went all through flight training together. And he lived right nearby in Laurelhurst, and his name was Ray Thompson. And so he had a problem with getting airsick in a certain airplane, and we flew the Yellow Perils, we call them, the N3N3s, which were built in the Philadelphia Naval Aircraft Factory. And there were two cockpits, one forward for the instructor and one aft for the student. And he conquered the thing and got over it, and then you get into another bigger plane later on. Why, he'd get the same problem and get over it, but I had so proud of him that he went all the way through flight school and graduated in 42 from Corpus Christi. And then he was, I was mentioning to Ron that you had the opportunity when you graduated to request the Pacific Fleet or the Atlantic Fleet, and being from Seattle, I asked for the Pacific Fleet, and evidently Ray did too. But I had a fellow across the hall from Washington, D.C., and he put into the Atlantic Fleet because he was, well, this was the Navy, so I was sent to the Atlantic Fleet, Norfolk, and he was sent to the Pacific Fleet. But Ray, of course, I didn't see him after I went to the Norfolk, and he went to San Diego, North Island, and he got into PBYs, which was an old multi-engine plane that we flew in flight school. It's the only thing we had. And then they were building the new PBM-3s, which were about twice the size of a PBY and a lot better airplane. And so they were building squadrons on the East Coast to fight the submarine problem we had. They were shipping, they're getting rid of a lot of our shipping, both North and South America. And so we ended up going to VPB 211. We went to Brazil. But believe it or not, things were so secret in those days, Ron, that when we left the States, we stopped first from Norfolk area down to Banana River Naval Air Station, where Cape Kennedy is now, and got checked out on the PBM-3s. And so we landed there, and I, of course, had taken off, landed there. But in our squadron, we had a rule that you had to have 29 hours of solo time in the plane to be in the left seat and in charge of the airplane. And I had 29.1 hours. I was at green and new, and we left and went to Guantanamo Bay, and we flew in, and we didn't know where we were going the next that night. They had dinner and said we were going to San Juan, Puerto Rico. And anyway, we worked our way on down to Brazil, but we had at Sandpoint had the Dick Merrick was our ensign instructor, or mine, and he'd actually been a fraternity brother, but he'd been a couple of years ahead of me, and I didn't know him before. But I don't know why, Ron, but you feel that guy that taught you how to fly was probably the best pilot in the Navy. You know, he was just an ensign, but a hell of a nice guy. And so I think I'd never been in a small plane in my life, and I think I soloed in 8 hours. And we used to put a red flag around the fuselage forward of the tail to let everybody know that this guy is on his first flight solo, so beware. And so the nice thing about Sandpoint, the water on both ends of the runway, so that you weren't disturbing going over any houses or buildings. And it was just it ended up in reputation during the war, one of the better air stations in the country, and people like to have duty there. And going out, you had to, incidentally, in those days before the war, you had to be unmarried, and you had to have a college degree, and you had to pass about a week's tests of psychological and physical tests. And there were just so many available in those days. And later on in the squadrons, we'd get a shipment of new pilots in, and God, they were like another generation. They were so young, we thought. But it was a custom of the Navy at that time, and they had to change. It wasn't too long. They'd had 2 years of college, and at the end of the war, I think it was a high school education. But there were just so many that qualified that were in the original age group. And in fact, from my fraternity, we were just that right age that an awful lot of the guys didn't make it back during World War II. And but we put in the 30 hours there, and there were a couple of items in my little book that I put together some years ago that we had one test. I know we went to the University of Washington, and some professor had invented a machine that he felt would test pilots to be without taking a lot of time. Time is of the essence in those days. And after dinner, they took us in a station wagon over to the university to this professor's office, and there was this machine that you had to hold some foot pedals steady, because if you put them down too much, the red light came out. You let up too much, the red light. And the same with your hands. You had a pressure deal. And then with your thumbs, you had to answer questions and read the question and answer. And so, and they had a guy down one floor below that took the readings, and took about a half hour. And so on the way back, I noticed that the other guys in the wagon, we had the scuttlebutt going on, who was going to wash out and who was going to make it. And I thought, geez, these guys all are on the list of people they think is going to wash out. And so that night, Dr. Dick Merrick, my pilot that I had that period, and he had the duty. And so I went down and I said, well, I'm not a child anymore. I said, I just took around this wagon I was in, and most of these guys in the scuttlebutt are going to wash out. And is that me too? What do you think? I just might as well tell me. And he sat back and laughed, and he said, well, you were right. He said, those people were doubtful. But he said, you were the control. We thought you were going to make it, and we'd compare your test with their test and see if there was a difference. And I never did find out whether the machine was a success. And years later, you know, whether they used it, I don't know.
Not in my time.
But it was, people were trying to find ways to qualify. In fact, I guess he told me, he said, I'm not going to put anybody through that I think isn't going to make it, because he said, I had a good friend that just had to be a Navy pilot, and he was a good friend, and I put him through, and he's dead now. And he said, no way I'm going to put anybody through if I don't think they're capable of making it. And then sometimes when we were up flying, and he'd tell me we had a Gosport. We'd talk from the two cockpits. They didn't have radios or anything. You just talk into this piece, this plastic Gosport, and he'd say, "Gee, Scarff, my mother could fly this plane better than you are, you know," and put you down, and then once we pulled up to the chocks and cut the engine, and he said, "Please don't take anything personal." He said, when we're up there, we've got to put pressure on you and see how you're going to react. And a little later, one of my friends that was going through with this had the same instructor, and he said, you know, Mr. Merrick told me that his sister could fly the plane better than you could. And I immediately felt a lot better. This was part of his routine. And that was something that we went through and it was cold in those days. This was the winter of 41, 42, and these open cockpits and so forth. It wasn't very cozy up there, but we had pretty good weather, and I think finally there were about 30 of us that made it through the elimination process, and they sent us down to Corpus Christi on a train, and we had to wait a month or so to get into Corpus Christi. It was a brand new base, so we were in Texas for a while, but we were in Class 3A, 1st of March, going through the old Corpus Christi, and we had I don't know if you did, Ron, the old 2 out of 3 checks. You didn't have your instructor, but 2 or 3 other instructors take you up for your so many hours, and you take a check ride, and you had to have 2 out of 3 ups to go on, or you went back to the civilian life. So it was a kind of a touch and go thing, and I think we had we didn't have a uniform, these V5 guys. We were a Seaman second, $36 a month, but with flight pay it was 50%, well, it was $54 a month. And we had black submarine jackets and green marine pants, and they until we became cadets, why, we were kind of a lost group. We became a cadet, you went into khakis and so forth, but it was kind of an interesting time at Sand Point, and there was a pretty busy base. I still, when I go out there now and then to the Sand Point Magnuson Park, why, I still go by that building on the left after you go through the gate, is one we used to use for physical testing. And I still remember they whirled you around in a chair quite a few times pretty fast, and then stopped it and see how long it took before you could see just one fire engine across the street instead of several. And that building is still there, and the one across the street, the fire deal, is still there. Well, I didn't have any particular problems at Sandpoint. It was always expected to be one of the better air stations in all of the United States, and it was a good group.
Good group, yeah.
Yeah.